Campbell's Soup bring you Amos and Andy.
I see them bloom for me and you, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world.
Oh, yeah. Good morning, everybody. Yes. Good morning, Wolfie. How are you?
I'm good, Howard. How are you?
All right. I'll open up the show with a phone call. Why not? Go ahead.
Hey guys, my name is Mark Dixon. I'm going to be talking about Chapter 10, Radio Broadcasting. What you just heard were different aspects of radio broadcasting from the beginning. I've always been a huge history buff, and I really enjoy seeing where things began. And the first really long-distance wireless transmission for radio that was considered radio was actually in Morse code. It was the letter S, and that's what you heard first. The next one you heard was from October 3rd, 1951. It was Russ Hodge calling the shot heard around the world. Bobby Thompson hit a home run that sent the Giants to the World Series ultimately, and that was the first coast-to-coast telecast in America's history. And it just shows the progression. I had some Louis Armstrong in there into, the satellite radio realm, and that was just to give you an idea of the progression of radio from the beginning. A couple questions you might wonder is, why does this matter? Why does the medium radio matter? Well, it's a free media outlet to the consumer. Basically free. You don't have to pay a subscription for it. You can buy a $5 receiver and you can pick up any AM or FM station you want to listen to. There are over 800 million receivers in the U.S. alone, and it is a major political, social, and economic medium for communication. Think Nixon-Kennedy debate when you're thinking of how is it politically an important medium for communication, and a lot of people that listened on the radio thought that in one of the debates between Nixon and Kennedy that Nixon had actually won just from his voice, just from the way they perceived the things he talked about. But the people with television sets who were able to see Kennedy and see how much younger he was, and I guess handsome would be the term, that played a lot into it. The cover of the book played a lot into who actually won that debate. The history of radio. When looking at the history of radio, it stems back to the late 1800s, early 1900s. The most renowned radio innovator was actually Guglielmo Marconi. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, so please don't take that to the bank. But Marconi was one of the first people to see actual profit potential in radio and start developing the wireless communication system. Marconi in 1901, as I said earlier, transmitted the letter S in Morse code across the Atlantic Ocean. It is actually kind of interesting, and I'll bring up a picture here in a second. Marconi used a 500-foot kite antenna for reception in Newfoundland, which is part of Canada, nearly 2,200 miles from Cornwall, where the original broadcast was sent. So he used these kites and different things to elevate where he could get the signal from. And so Marconi was truly inspirational in being able to transmit long-distance radio calls. Edwin Howard Armstrong developed regeneration. That is the principle behind the signal amplification, why it only takes one tower to shoot over 100 miles. I mean, these kinds of things, the amplification of the signal all goes through a process that's called regeneration. He also developed what's called the super heterodyne tuner. This led to the ability of cheaper receivers being made. Used to be you'd buy the instructions for a radio, and you would go and buy all the different things from a hardware store and have to put it together. Well, this tuner actually allowed for mass building of radio dials and allowed them to be sold at a cheaper price, and you still got high performance from them. Edwin Howard Armstrong also developed the frequency modulation, or FM, in 1933. It took nearly 20 years for FM to really take off, and it wasn't until 1978 that FM actually exceeded the listenership that AM had. What took FM so long? AM radio didn't want to change. They talked to the FCC, which is the Federal Communications Commission, and they asked them to relocate the FM frequencies, making them higher, making them harder for people to reach. When the FCC complied, it actually kind of rendered FM useless because of the wave frequencies, like I had said. And it wasn't until 1961 when the FCC authorized stereo broadcasting on FM. In 1964, before the FCC ended simulcasting on AM and FM stations. And what simulcasting is you could play one thing on AM and the same thing on FM. So people would generally go to AM just to listen to it for some reason because it was the way of the world. FM is a much better way to communicate, way to send out radio signals. AM is more of, it's staticky. It's up and down. If you look at your slide, the difference between AM and FM, AM is amplitude modulation, and FM is frequency modulation. And the sound waves are very different. AM has a frequency that varies to match the audio signal, making it easy to cause interference. So the way a word is said, the volume of which it is said, those kind of things alter AM's amplitude of wavelength. And that allows electronic interference throughout whatever is going on in between where the signal is sent and the receiver that is receiving the message. FM has a calculated, it's a calculated amplitude. It stays pretty much the same as it's being sent. If you could visualize it, it's the same the entire time, and that doesn't leave room for interference. That doesn't leave room for any kind of electrical interruption within the frequency because it is constant. Just like anything that's constant, it's hard to interrupt something that is constant, and that's what FM is. Now the niches that the niches or niches or niches, however you pronounce it. AM finally found its role in low-cost talk radio. FM, generally music, because of the ability for FM not to be interrupted as much. Now, looking at AM and FM today, AM used to use dramas, talk shows, news stories, and music. Now, AM does mainly low-cost talk radio. FM mainly does music. And it all started pretty much with Marconi. The history of radio is really not well documented at all. So this is just going from some of the research that I've had and some of the people that I've talked to about it on the campus where I work. Now, some of the things that are impacting radio now are, there's 4 different things that the book talks about. There's new technology, there's delivery competition, And then there are things to try and counteract those that radio is doing so that it remains important in today's society. And that's the low power FM services are coming back, and hybrid digital radio. That's HD radio. And we'll talk a little bit about those. The new technology that we're discussing, you look at MP3s. Those have developed, and when you take CDs to the MP3, you can get a lot of information in just a little bit of memory. And when MP3s were developed, then you develop your iPods, your digital media players. And those media players allow you to listen to the music you want to with no interruption, no commercial breaks, no nothing. You can buy your MP3 of the song you want, whether it be edited, unedited, or a live version or something of that nature. And you can put it on your digital media players or your cell phone, and you can listen to this music on your cell phone or your iPod. And that has taken away from radio, because now more of the car companies, and there's a percentage that 75% of all radio listening takes place in a car. And what car manufacturers are doing is noticing, oh man, these people like these MP3s and their smartphones and their digital media players. So what they're doing is they're putting ports in the newer cars so that you don't have to listen to the radio. You can plug your phone directly in or through Bluetooth, and you can listen to your songs without any commercial interruption. Looking at today, 44% of Americans over the age of 12 own a smartphone, and 61% of those own a digital device. So you look at how many people own a smartphone and a digital media player, and how many people own and how many people actually want to listen to the radio when you have all these commercials, and you can see why there's trouble. Why there's trouble with the terrestrial radio industry. We'll say terrestrial here on the ground, nothing coming from satellites or anything like that. The terrestrial radio stations use towers and send them out, and that's what you listen to on the AM and FM. You think about the high-speed internet and how that plays a toll into the radio. I know when I'm traveling, I usually put my iPhone on Pandora if I'm already done listening to the music or the MP3s that I put on my iPhone. And when I'm done with that, I put on Pandora, and Pandora plays 5 or 6 songs in a row with no commercials. Then you have maybe a 30-second commercial, and then you're back to listening to the genre you want to listen to or the type of music you want to listen to. It gives you that control that you don't have with radio. Most radio likes to play your top hits, or they like to play your classic rock, or this, that, and the other thing. You can change the radio station, but it's oftentimes hard to find one that's not playing commercials. Moving on to the next, satellite radio. A lot of people are willing to pay $8 to $18 a month so that they can have the Sirius XM experience. Now, satellite radio started in 2001 with XM satellite radio, and then in 2002 the introduction of Sirius satellite radio, and 6 years later in 2008 they merged. The good thing about satellite radio is, other than tunnels and if you're in valleys, you can pretty much get clear signal anywhere. They also offer NHL, MLB, NBA, PGA Tour, and major college sports talk radio on Sirius XM. All of these things are playing a factor into the demise of radio. Now, what is radio doing to kind of counteract these things? Well, they're putting new voices for the communities. What the FCC has done is they've allowed low-power FM services. Their 100-watt stations can generally travel from 3 to 5 miles to broadcast pretty much anything that is involved with that nonprofit organization. It has to be a nonprofit organization, and it has to be educational programming. But these stations are powerful enough to interrupt those on those major radio stations that go into the smaller communities and take up all the marketing and advertising. So this small radio station interrupts into that and draws people to listen to them if they're interested in whatever the nonprofit is. So they're trying to draw people back into radio by using it as an educational service, which may or may not work. The interest level, there were 2,500 low power FM services stations that were given licenses by the FCC in 2011. And so, they're kind of catching on, but it's a very slow process, and who knows exactly what's going to happen. Another thing that radio has tried to do to save itself, or terrestrial radio, I should say, is digital broadcasting. It allows extra bandwidth for more diverse stations on the same frequency. Kind of like when we were talking about, or when we listened to the presentation on digital TV. Digital radio is the same principle. You can send multiple stations to one different frequency. Now, the problem with this is you have to buy an HD receiver, which is expensive. It's $50 to $500 to $400, excuse me. And it's hybrid digital. It's not high definition radio. HD stands for hybrid digital. Now, $50 to $400 for a receiver that, say you go to 104.5, which would be, let's say, classic rock, and 104.5 wants to send out a sports news station. So then you go to 104.5 -1. Then you have 104.5-2, kind of just like television. That's what they're trying to do. The problem with this is people are not wanting to pay that money for the HD receivers. They're not wanting... It does give the people the choice, better choices, because it shows up what you're listening to, but it's not the same as satellite. And satellite radio has truly thrown a wrench into things for the radio business in general. So looking at that, with the high-speed internet, the Pandoras, everything that's going on, it begs the question, how long will radio continue to be relevant as a medium for political, economic, and social services? You look at radio and you look at all the commercials that go into it. I used to work in radio, and we even began sending satellite signal frequencies, so that because we didn't have the money to pay somebody to be at the station all the time. So we'd come in, do our show, check on everything, make sure it's being uploaded to the internet and everything like that. But the place ended up going out of business. So radio is slowly dying. Do you think that the terrestrial radio will ever be able to bounce back from what is going on now? Or do you think that we are seeing the end of an age with radio and the newspapers going out like they are because of the advancement in technology?